Hi, the group members are Sebastian Belmonte, Luis Diaz, and Momoka Haruta. I'm going to talk about Haruki Murakami's personal life and some of the key moments that helped shape who he is as a writer. Haruki Murakami was born in Kyoto on January 12, 1949, and grew up in Kobe. As one of Japan's leading authors and translators, his work has captivated many readers around the world. Even though he was surrounded by Japanese classics, Murakami was more interested in Western writers. He was particularly fascinated by Western literature, such as F. Scott Fitzgerald and Chandler, rather than Japanese literature. He had said, "Without F. Scott Fitzgerald's novel, I would be writing the kind of novel I am writing now." That shows just how much impact his writing style. As Murakami chose a lifestyle different from the average corporate job at the time. As Murakami chose a lifestyle different from the average corporate job at the time. He struggled financially, but his life in coffee shop would later have a major influence on his literary style and sensibility. The moment Murakami decided to become a writer came out of nowhere. He was a baseball game in 1978, watching the Yakult Solo play the Hiroshima Cup. An American player, Dave Hilton, hit a double, and in that exit moment, Murakami felt something shift. He said, in the instant, for no reason and on no grounds whatsoever, the thought suddenly struck me. I think I can write a novel. The same night, he began writing. He had no formal training, but after working at a bar, he would stay up later to write. In about 6 months, he finished his first novel. Hear the Wind Sing. He submitted it to a literary contest, and to his surprise, it won the Ganzo Literature Prize in 1979. The win launched his career. In the late 1980s, Murakami left Japan due to the dissatisfaction with the political atmosphere and his discomfort with the growing fame he was experiencing. He lived in Europe before moving to the United States, where he taught at Princeton and Tufts University. However, in 1995, two major events, the Hanshin earthquake and the Tokyo subway sarin gas attack, deeply affected him. He returned to Japan and began interviewing individuals connected to the attacks. Those interviews later became the basis for his nonfiction work, Underground, which offer powerful insight into the lives of those affected. I will talk about Murakami Haruki's short story, The 100% Girl on Beautiful April Morning, and its relationship to his own life. At first glance, this story seems like a romantic love story, but it is actually a work that reflects the deepness of Murakami Haruki's own heart. The story begins the protagonist passing a woman on the street in Harajuku and has an intuition that this is a 100% girl. However, the protagonist passing by without being able to say anything. It is a sad story with a quick scene of loss. It is said that this unscathed feeling comes from Murakami Haruki's own experience. When he was young, he lived abroad and constantly confronted with loneliness, alienation, and feeling that could not be put into words. This is why the protagonist's behavior of not being able to speak up is thought that deeply reflects his social anxiety and lack of confidence. and it commonly asks how to face regret, loneliness, and feelings that cannot be put in words. This story shows us that feeling encounter can change our life, and the unexpressed regret is also important emotion that shape who we are. I believe those were the reason why Murakami Haruki is loved all over the world. Haruki Murakami's novels have been translated into over the 50 languages and are loved all over the world. Born from his personal curiosity, quiet observations, and every life experience, his stories do not teach moral lessons or impose specific themes. Rather, his stories feel as if they just flow naturally from within him. Even though his words may seem unreal and strange, his words somehow feel real to us readers. His work makes us feel something about our own lives. Observing the 100% perfect girl one beautiful every morning is not just a romantic story. Rather, it is just work that reflects the depth of Haruki Murakami's heart. Depicts the sadness of missing connecting and the wasted of unexpressed feelings. Through this story, we learn how a single encounter can have great meaning in life, and the regret, the loneliness are also important emotions that shape who we are. By living our living story in our hearts, just like Haruki, we too may be able to notice the miracle and depth of emotion that exists in the midst of everyday life. A mere passing encounter can conversely such as beautiful, poignant, and personal truth. This is the charm of this work and the true essence of Haruki's literature, and I believe that is why he loved around the world.
Hey everybody, my name is Sebastian Wante, and I'll be doing Haruki Murakami's historical events and how his cultural practices in Japan and American culture affected both his works, his books, and specifically his 100% Girl short story. And so, moving on to this timeline here is basically just a very abridged summary of Japan over a century. And so, moving on to the first period I have here on the left, which is the Meiji period. It was also led by Emperor Meiji, well, of course, because the periods were actually named after the emperor of the current era. And so, moving on, the Meiji period was basically a time of modernization for Japan, as its previous feudal system and almost samurai like government through Emperor Meiji turned into a much more modern parliament system featuring branches of government and limitations on the emperor, which is similar to our limitations on the president. And so moving on, because of the modernization, new technologies came in, and specifically the adoption of Western technologies. And so this was the start of how Western influences, specifically America and Europe, or in this case the US, affected Japan in a way that it just became more modern. And so through this, the political reforms happened. In this case here is first the first Sino-Japanese War, which basically dethroned China in their global superpower in Asia and made it more into Japan's throne. The Russo-Japanese War features how, one of the first times in history, where Asia actually won against a major war against a European power, and for the annexation of Korea, it's an important piece of information to remember as during this time Japan was also very militaristic, and after moving on into the Taisho period, it became much more democratic but at the same time imperialistic with the militarism. And so during Emperor Taisho's rule, and honorable mention to Prime Minister Hara Takashi, a very, very peace-loving man, they created the Taisho government, or known as the Taisho democracy, which basically led the government into a more party-led government. So similar to Republican and democracy, but in this case for Japan's parties. And during this era, World War One happened, and joined the Allies during this thing, and overall, it was very, very filled with war, but at the same time not very uneventful compared to the Showa period here for the final period we have, featuring Emperor Showa and of course Prime Minister Haruo Takashi again, but less more honorable as World War II happened. And so during this time of war, well, not throughout the whole thing, but for the time of World War II, Showa militarism was very emphasized here as the leading party, as they were also very interested in getting natural resources, thus the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which initiated them into World War II. Later, as they joined the Axis trio, everything happened, and well, that happened. And now, after Japan's surrender, we can move on to Haruki Murakami's life starting at 1949. And so during this era, a lot happened. Not only did Japan surrender, but they also became much more modern in a way that they were more peace going. And so during the 1945-1952 occupation era, Douglas MacArthur, which is the American top general of this time and leader of against the invasion on Japan, he not only demilitarized Japan, but he also created a new constitution that acted similar to America's or I guess the United States in a way that it gave a lot of rights and civil rights. And that's why it correlates to Japan's economic miracle. And because the more emphasis on the recovery period and much more rights for all, Japan went into like a zealous frenzy of some sorts, making making jobs, careers, and overall just the well-being of Japan as the number one focus, leading up to more jobs, more technologies being made, and that's how Toyota, Sony, and Panasonic came through as global superpowers, is because of Japan's miracle economic growth. But the backlash with this is since everyone focused on school, well, everyone knows what happened during college applications, how stressful it was. And so just imagine that level of stress, but prolonged from freshman to senior year, and it's tripled because the emphasis on career was very strict. And choosing happiness over like a good job can get you almost not dethroned, but more. Actually, it's pretty close to being dethroned. You will get kicked out of your family. Mental illness will come through just because the pressure from peers and family, and overall, just how society treats you for choosing happiness. And so, as this culture of shaming came through, the culture of yearning for happiness, and overall just mental illness from from stress and everything, that's where Maruka Murakami or Murakami, sorry, Murakami's emphasis on literature really shines, as Norwegian Wood, one of the works he published over the years, focuses on themes of grief and loss, similar to how Japan felt during the time of surrender, post-surrender, and overall just how people mentally felt during this era. And through Norwegian Wood and West of the Sun and South of the Border, other works that Murakami wrote, it's just he just couches that sense of almost I'll say depressive level of emotions really embedded in Japan culture. And so on to the next timeline here, publishing on the Seeing the 100% Girl on one beautiful April morning. That's where he published it in 1981. And continuing on here is basically just a video explaining Murakami's emphasis on just that magical realism that is very prominent in Seeing the 100% Perfect Girl. Because remember, once they meet on the perfect road, while the man meets a perfectly ordinary woman, despite her ordinary looks and lack of like attentive or a lack of taste, the man just unknowingly just finds his soulmate almost. And that sense of destiny or just like transcendental thought that overtakes rationalism, that's what Murakami loves doing. And so in this video, it's just a short video explaining his likes and dislikes and how Western influences like jazz and music really affected him as as a writer and a person.
I don't have any sisters and brothers, and I'm alone in the house.
Sad. He's
So
very introverted
I
too,
have
guys.
three things to help me. The cat
Oh, wala my
and
kids.
books
Oh,
and the
books
music.
too.
So now, still now, music helps me to write. You know, to write is a very it's a very solitude.
That's how I feel when I
You
stutter
have
like
to
that.
walk alone when you're writing. So I need some things to help me to keep on writing. So music is one of them.
And what I really like about the emphasis on music and walking is that he just loves the aspect of just continuing and being straightforward, continuing on the path of destination. And so, because of this sense of like urgency to let out something, he not only breaks the cultural stereotype of keeping it in, but he also does like a call to action of saying like you should do it. Like who cares? Oh, okay, care about your future, but at the same time, let happiness be part of your future. And that call to action is what really made Haruki Murakami very famous in Japan, because not he went against, I guess, literature in a way that during his era he broke through that level of sadness that everyone experienced. And through his writings, through the 100% Girl, Norwegian Wood, West of the Sun, he was just amazing. And overall, I do recommend reading him because I have personally read his books, but overall, I really do recommend reading his works. All right, and so we'll be moving on to the next slides over. And have a great day, everybody. Embarrassing. Give me it. And clock it.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Today, I'll be talking about Haruki Murakami, one of Japan's most celebrated and influential contemporary authors. His work explores complex themes, often blending surrealism with existential thoughts through his books. Murakami has not only captivated global readers with his unique storytelling style, but also made an inevitable mark on modern culture. Today, I'll guide you through the political and philosophical context that shapes his work, as well as how his life and literature have influenced contemporary culture. So, to start off, let's start with his early exposure to political movements. Murakami's formative years were marked by political unrest, especially during Japan's 1960 student protests, which you may have seen in the previous slides. These protests deeply impacted Murakami's worldview, shaping his early writing. His novels, Hear the Wind Sing and A Wild Sheep Chase, reflect the influence of this era. Murakami's characters often grapple with questions of purpose and identity, echoing the disillusionments felt by Japan's youth at the time. Then we have his public political stances. Murakami's engagement with politics did not end in his youth. He has been vocal in criticizing rising nationalism in Japan. His concern about the resurgence of nationalistic sentiment and his stance against Japan's militaristic past are prominent themes in his later works. Additionally, Murakami has publicly supported same-sex marriage, advocating for a greater social acceptance and equality in Japan. This shows how his political views continue to shape his public persona, often aligning with global movements for peace and human rights. Next, for the next slide. Now let's look at how protest and resistance manifest in Murakami's works. Opposition to Japanese militarism. Murakami has expressed strong opposition to Japanese militarism, particularly in its involvements in international conflicts, not his personal involvements. He has criticized Japan's participation in global military actions, such as in the Iraq War. In his novel, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, as you can see the image right here on to the right, this theme has themes of protest is evident through his characters. Murakami explores the psychological effects of war and militarism, often focusing on the trauma it causes to individuals and societies. Then we have his advocacy for peace and human rights. Murakami's stance is on peace is also deeply intertwined with his personal beliefs. His support for peace and human rights resonates through his characters, who often find themselves at odds with societal norms and expectations that drive conflict through their journeys. We can see this through the this week's reading on the Seeing 100% a Girl, where we can see how the narrator, instead of going or being attracted to the girl for societal norms such as her looks, youth, or anything else, he is more attracted based on his intuition and maybe can be connected to his experience that lets him see more than just surface level looks. Murakami examines the consequences of war, oppression, and violence in his works Call for Rejection and The Human Cost of Conflict and a Commitment for Peaceful Coexistence. Then we have his philosophical context of his works, his stories, and how it's deeply influenced by and existential thoughts. Existentialism, Murakami's characters often confront feelings of isolation and a lack of clear and purpose, resonating with existential philosophy. This sense of being thrown into the world without any clear meaning or direction is a central theme in many of his novels. His characters experience alienation and struggle for self-definition, often questioning their place in the universe. Murakami's existential themes echo the works of philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre, who explored the burden of freedom and the responsibility of creating one's own essence. Then we have loneliness and the search for meaning. Other key aspects of Murakami's work is the exploration of loneliness. His characters frequently deal with emotional and psychological isolation, whether through the disillusionments of personal relationships or through their search for meaning in a different world. Murakami portrays the idea that life's meaning is something one must create for oneself, echoing the existential notion that we must find purpose through our actions and choices, kind of tying or pointing more towards the transition from innocence to experience. Then we have walls and solitude. An interesting motif in Murakami's work is the theme of walls, both literal and metaphorical. In the stories like the one we just read this week on Seeing the Perfect Girl, the narrator isolates themselves physically and emotionally from others. This creates a sense of personal barrier or a wall, highlighting the human tendency to retreat into solitude as we see how instead of going up to the girl on the street and talking to her, he just kind of ignores it and just goes on his way. Murakami's writing often contemplates how people hold themselves back from connection, be it through fear, insecurity, or the complexity of human nature, as we just saw in the reading for this week on Seeing 100% of the Girl, Seeing the Perfect Girl. Next, we have influences on modern culture from bridging cultural gaps. Murakami has become a cultural ambassador of sorts, bridging the gap between the Japanese and Western worlds. His books have resonated with international audiences, and his influence extends beyond just literature. Murakami has contributed to the global understanding of Japanese culture, providing readers with a window into the complexities of Japanese society through his unique narrative style. And one of these other windows beyond literature is fashion. As you can see right here, he has partnered with various different clothing lines to produce his own signature look and streetwear, which at first I thought of getting one of those shirts to wear for this presentation. And then and then once we reach this slide, I'll review that entire time. I was wearing one of his works, but unfortunately I couldn't find one that would get to me in time for this presentation. So Murakami's influence also extends into his fashion. His collaborations with major brands, particularly in the realm of streetwear, have made his name synonymous with contemporary fashion. His t-shirt designs and collaboration with brands like Uniqlo have made his work accessible to younger audiences and allowed his literary persona to cross into popular culture. Philosophical exploration. Murakami's philosophical explorations have also made an impact in his works. His works prompts readers to examine themes of identity, meaning, and freedom, encouraging philosophical discussion in academic and cultural circles. His introspective characters and surreal storytelling have become a staple in discussions about the intersection of literature, philosophy, and modern consciousness. Critique of modern society. We have seen in the previous slides that he does like to critique government and modern society. Murakami has critiqued modern society, particularly in its consumerism and alienating effects of technology. Through his characters' struggles and societal landscapes they navigate, Murakami offers a subtle but poignant critique of contemporary life. His works raise important questions about the peace of modern living and existential dilemmas that arise in increasingly fragmented and commercialized worlds. I'm sure that we could all kind of resonate with the feeling of isolation, especially during COVID when we were all in the lockdown and we had to attend class through Zoom meetings. In conclusion, Haruki Murakami's life and works are not only shaped by the political and philosophical context of his time, but also influenced global culture in significant ways. From his experiences with political movements to his philosophical exploration of existentialism, Murakami has created a body of work that continues to resonate with readers around the world. His critique of society, supports for peace and human rights, and his contributions to our culture through fashion and philosophical thoughts make him one of the most important writers of our time. We can also connect his works to what we have read this week, where many of the characters and stories include the transition from innocence to experience, such as the ones where the main character fights against government. Thank you guys for listening and have a great rest of your day.